Welcome to Mystery Cafe, your ultimate stop for gripping detective stories, chilling mysteries, and unforgettable investigations. Here, every video serves a fresh dose of suspense, shocking twists, and cases that challenge your inner detective. From classic whodunits to modern crime stories, we bring the world of mystery straight to your screen, where every clue matters and no secret stays buried for long. Before we start unraveling today's mystery, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Globe showing Europe, Africa. Drop your country, city, or stay in the comments, and let's see how far the Mystery Cafe family reaches. Magnifying glass tilted right.
The Vanishing Portrait. Chapter 1, The Letter from Greythorne. It was on an October morning, crisp in sunlight, that the letter came to our rooms in Brook Street. The day had that keen sparkle London sometimes borrows from the country, and the pavement outside shone as though newly polished. I had been engaged in the humble but absorbing business of mending a pen when the bell rang and our landlady, with an air of restrained drama, bore in an envelope the color of old cream. All the way from Shropshire, she announced, as though the county itself had written. And the footman said it was to be put into Mr. Pinkerton's own hands. Allan Pinkerton, whose reputation for calm precision had lately drifted across more drawing rooms than smoke from a winter grate, took the letter without comment. He slit the seal cleanly, and as his eyes moved over the page, I saw that fine, almost imperceptible tightening at the corner of his mouth which meant information had found its mark. "You observe the paper," he said, passing it to me. "Good quality, a faint watermark, Greythorne Mill. The writer's hand is clear, unadorned, there is feeling here, but held in check." The letter, in a firm feminine script, was brief. "Mr. Pinkerton. Greythorne Hall has suffered a most inexplicable loss. During a musical evening last night, a family portrait of great antiquity and value was removed from the grand gallery, vanished, in fact, without disturbance or alarm. There is more at stake than mere art, and I beg you to come at once. Yours faithfully, Lady Eleanor Wrexham." Vanished, I repeated. One does not often see a painting take it upon itself to walk out. "Just so," said Pinkerton, the faintest smile touching his eyes. "Yet words chosen in haste sometimes tell truths unintended. We will take the noon train." Greythorne Hall rose from the Shropshire parkland like a thing that had grown there, long, honeyed elevations, mullioned windows catching the thin autumn sun, and, before the west front, an avenue of lindens already shedding pale coins of leaf upon the gravel. A brace of peacocks paraded with the air of proprietors. It was the sort of house that, at a glance, suggested calm continuities. The presence of a detective at its doors hinted that those continuities had suffered a jar. Lady Wrexham received us in a morning room where the fire had been encouraged into cheerfulness. She was a handsome woman of perhaps 50, with the composed, well-ruled face of one used to chairing committees and comforting the afflicted. Yet there was a line at the corner of her mouth that argued against sleep. "Mr. Pinkerton," she said, offering a cool hand that warmed as it touched his, "you are good to come so promptly." Her glance took in my person. "And this is?" "My colleague," said Pinkerton, "who helps me remember what I would otherwise overlook." "Then God send you both sharp eyes," Lady Wrexham returned, with a smile that acknowledged the jest and went past it. "You shall want them." She led us along a passage hung with landscapes, sturdy cows contemplating sturdy streams, toward a pair of walnut doors which she unlocked with a small key from a ring at her belt. "I thought it best to keep the room secured," she explained, "until you had seen it." The grand gallery was handsome in the sober manner, a long chamber with a coved ceiling painted in faded allegory, and at intervals along its walls, portraits of Wrexhams in armor, Wrexhams in lace, Wrexhams holding gloves or dogs or ministerial papers with equal gravity. Sunlight came thinly through high windows, laying pale rectangles on a parquet floor polished to a mirror. The absence announced itself before I had looked for it, midway along the left wall, between a lady in satin and a judge in scarlet, an empty, gilded frame hung like a window opening onto plaster. Lady Wrexham halted. "Sir Richard Wrexham by Lely," she said quietly. "17th century. He has hung there since Charles's time. Last night, between the first aria and the supper tray, he left." Pinkerton approached the frame without haste. He stood quite still for a few moments, as if listening, then drew from his pocket a little convex glass. "You locked the doors after the alarm?" "The doors were locked before," said Lady Wrexham, with an effort at composure. "We keep the gallery shut during entertainments, partly to avoid accidents, partly," her smile flickered. "Partly because guests become lost in the faces and miss their supper." "And yet guests were within the gallery," Pinkerton observed. "We admitted them between pieces to stroll, under supervision. The doors were opened and closed by Mr. Coates, our butler. There was a footman on duty at the farther end. When the violoncellist began his second item, the company drifted back. I was among the last to leave. The frame had not yet been touched. Pinkerton's glass had found something at the lower inner edge. He produced a handkerchief and very gently lifted away a minute curl of thread. "Canvas lint," he murmured. "Extremely fine. A careful hand, then." He breathed on the gilding, and as the mist cleared I saw, or fancied I saw, the faintest smear upon the leaf, a paler streak, as if a gloved finger had drawn itself along the edge and left, not dirt, but cleanliness. He touched the wall inside the frame and then the plaster just beyond it. "Do you perceive a difference, my friend?" I did, when he indicated the exact place. A rectangle of plaster within the frame had a cooler hue, as though lately shaded, the surrounding wall wore the faint bloom that time gives. "Light falls where it may, but dust falls where it must," Pinkerton said, almost to himself. "When dust is absent, someone has paid attention." He turned to Lady Wrexham. "Who composed your company last night?" She named them: Sir Barnaby Cleave, member for the borough and a friend of Lord Wrexham's youth; Miss Ada Vale, a pianist whose lightness of finger was much praised; Captain Rooke, lately of India; the Reverend Silas Kent, rector and family adviser; Mr. Humphrey Nye, a London dealer in pictures and porcelain; 3 neighbours of long standing; and, not least, Mr. Julian Harbury, Lady Wrexham's nephew by marriage, who is staying with us while his affairs in town are arranged. And the servants on duty? Mr. Coates and Pritchard, Ned Pritchard, at the far door. Mrs. Brigstock, the housekeeper, oversaw the supper. There were 2 parlour maids in attendance. Pritchard, Pinkerton repeated quietly. "Is he here?" Lady Wrexham's control wavered. "He has not been found this morning. Mr. Coates assures me he is no truant. It is unlike him." Pinkerton nodded as if the point had been conceded. "We shall wish to speak to Mr. Coates and to Mrs. Brigstock. Also to Mr. Nye, the dealer, if he remains." "He does. He has been helpful, though," she stopped. "Though dealers are helpful to themselves first," Pinkerton supplied, with a courtesy that removed the sting. "May I trouble you for the key to this door and its fellow?" She gave him the small ring. He weighed it, examined each ward with the eye of a man who likes locks because they make men confident. "Duplications?" "None that I know of." "Ah," said Pinkerton, and his tone made the syllable mean not disbelief, but patience. He crossed to the far end, where a velvet rope barred a narrower passage. Here, on the skirting board, a faint scatter of pale grit had gathered, almost invisible until Pinkerton's fingertip traced it. He lifted the dust to the light. "Plaster," he said. "Freshly disturbed." Lady Wrexham looked puzzled. "But nothing has been altered there." "On the contrary," Pinkerton replied gently. "Something has been concealed, which is a form of alteration." We left the gallery and were shown into the library, a handsome room that smelt of Russia leather and pipe smoke. Mr. Coates, the butler, presented himself, a tall, grave man who had the air of belonging more to the hall than any portrait upon its walls. He answered Pinkerton's questions with the exactitude of a man aware that accuracy is the last refuge of dignity. "The doors, sir, were opened and closed according to Lady Wrexham's instructions. I accompanied the first group along the gallery, and Pritchard remained at the far door to receive them. When the music resumed, I closed the near door and turned the key. I then walked the length of the gallery to see all in order. The portrait, Sir Richard, was in place. Pritchard closed his door. We returned to the music room. Did anyone loiter?" Pinkerton asked. Mr. Coates allowed himself a fractional pause. "Mr. Harbury is a young gentleman, sir. Young gentlemen sometimes value conversation over program notes." "Just so," Pinkerton murmured. "And Mr. Nye?" "Mr. Nye, sir, spoke at some length of varnish." Pinkerton's interest quickened almost imperceptibly. "Varnish?" "Dammer, sir. He said Lely's Manor benefited from careful revarnishing in damp climates." I did not presume to contradict. "And Pritchard?" "Pritchard is steady, sir. He was proud to be in the gallery. His people are from the village. Mrs. Brigstock's niece is to marry him at Michaelmas." The butler's control thinned a little. "If he has erred, he will answer to me first." Pinkerton thanked him and asked for the housekeeper. Mrs. Brigstock, round and resolute, with an apron that could have stood by itself, declared that her supper had been perfection and that if thieves could be kept at bay by lobster patties alone, Greythorne would be impregnable. She had seen Pritchard carry 2 trays, balance them like a juggler, and vanish, as respectable as a parish clock. "And the guests?" Pinkerton asked. "Hungry, sir, and no wonder with all that foreign twangling. The clergyman ate like a Christian, the captain admired the curry, the young ladies pecked. Mr. Harbury drank champagne when he thought I wasn't looking. He isn't a bad sort," she added grudgingly, "but he thinks habit makes a man, and it's character as does it." Pinkerton's eyes softened. A distinction worth remembering. When we were alone again, he stood a moment by the library window, watching a gardener shake a border into neatness. "You see the outline," he said to me. "A portrait that ought not to have moved, a door that ought not to have opened, a servant who ought to be visible is invisible. And the talk of varnish, always attend to what men discuss when they believe it safe to be ignorant. You think the dealer? I think Mr. Nye knows more than he has said. But the first truth, I believe, will come through Pritchard. Either he has gone to ground in fear or been persuaded to stay out of sight. In either event, he is nearer than they suppose." "And the painting?" Pinkerton's grey eyes returned to the empty frame as though it had spoken, and he was courteous enough to listen. "I have a little fancy," he said. "Not a solution, only a shape of one. Let us see whether Greythorne's walls are as honest as its windows." He took from his pocket a small folding rule and the convex glass, and together we went back to the gallery, where sunlight lay in clear oblongs and Sir Richard Wrexham's absence made its own sort of presence. Pinkerton measured the inner edge of the frame, then the distance to the skirting, then the depth of the panel below. When he pressed, very gently, upon a carved acanthus leaf, there came the softest tremor, no more than a sigh. "Ah," he said, and his voice was content without being satisfied. Greythorne keeps secrets in the proper manner, behind good joinery. He stepped back, the ghost of a smile at the corner of his mouth. We shall speak to Mr. Nye next, and to Mr. Harbury. But first, Lady Wrexham must tell me why she wrote that there is more at stake than art. He glanced once more at the faint smear on the gilding, as if committing it to memory. People do not risk themselves for beauty alone, he added, almost gently. There is always a second canvas sewn beneath the first. And with that, the investigation began in earnest. Chapter 2, First Impressions. The October afternoon had drawn in close about Greythorne Hall, laying a fine gold over the parkland that sharpened to amber where the sun touched the upper windows. From the library, where we had taken coffee, the view was all gentle lawns and the pale shapes of deer moving under the beech trees. It might have been a scene from any quiet country house, had there not been a gilded frame in the grand gallery hanging empty as a toothless smile. Lady Wrexham returned with the air of one who has set her mind to business. "Mr. Pinkerton, you will meet the household," she announced. "It is best you see them at once, before speculation ferments into invention." Pinkerton rose. "People's first stories, madam, are the most valuable. They have not yet thought what to omit." She led us through a warren of rooms and passages until we reached the south drawing-room. It was a handsome chamber, full of pale light and pale upholstery, with the Wrexham crest in the center of the carpet like a watermark. Here the company had been gathered, a cross-section of society that, even in repose, seemed to lean in different directions. Sir Barnaby Cleeve was the first to catch the eye, a large man with a deep voice, leaning upon a malacca cane as though it were both prop and scepter. His suit was dark, the waistcoat splendid with a spray of tiny gold hounds in pursuit of invisible game. His gaze met Pinkerton's with a frankness that might have been candor or challenge. Beside him sat Miss Ada Vale, a pianist of some repute. She had the sort of delicate, symmetrical face that suggested her beauty had been carefully kept, as one keeps an instrument in tune. Her eyes, however, were restless, darting from one person to another as though looking for a cue. Captain Rook stood a little apart, by the marble-topped console. He was wiry, sun-browned, and carried the faint air of a man more comfortable under canvas than in brocade-hung rooms. A white scar drew an uncompromising line from his temple to his cheekbone. He watched everything, saying nothing. The Reverend Silas Kent, neat and unhurried, held a china cup in one long hand, the other resting on the silver head of his walking stick. His gaze seemed mild enough, but Pinkerton's glance lingered there a moment longer than politeness required. Near the fireplace stood Mr. Humphrey Nye, the London dealer, whose black frock coat and perfectly brushed hair were set off by a diamond pin in his cravat. His expression was one of courteous interest, his hands, folded before him, looked capable of unwrapping a Rembrandt without smudging the varnish. And finally, lounging in a chair with one leg crossed elegantly over the other, was Mr. Julian Harbury, Lady Wrexham's nephew by marriage. Young, fair, and dressed with the art of one who disdains to appear artful, he greeted Pinkerton with a quick smile and a flash of teeth that might have belonged to either charm or mischief. Lady Wrexham made the introductions, then withdrew to an armchair, signaling Pinkerton to proceed. He stood easily before the mantel, the faintest hint of warmth in his voice. "Last night," he said, "Sir Richard Wrexham departed his frame without notice. No one saw him go, no one stopped him. This is, you will agree, unusual for a man who has been still for 200 years. A ripple of restrained amusement passed among them. "I should like to know," Pinkerton continued, "where each of you was between the close of Miss Vale's first piece and the serving of the supper tray." Sir Barnaby spoke first, his voice like gravel under a wheel. "I remained in the music room, sir. I have no taste for wandering galleries, my knees are for sitting, not climbing stairs." Miss Vale's voice was soft but clear. I was at the pianoforte, turning over my scores. I went into the gallery only after Captain Rook remarked upon the portraits. The captain inclined his head. I took a look in, yes. Old houses interest me, military habit. I saw the painting was there, no disturbance. Left after a few minutes. The Reverend smiled faintly. I was engaged in conversation with Lady Wrexham and Mr. Nye, just outside the gallery doors. We admired the portraits in passing but did not linger. Nye gave a polished nod. Indeed. We spoke of Varnish, as Lady Wrexham may have mentioned. Sir Richard was in place, and quite as magnificent as ever. Harbury, last, shrugged. I was here and there. I think I looked in at the gallery for a moment, chatted with Miss Vale about some Italian fellow's portraiture, but I confess I found the music more engaging. Pinkerton listened without interruption, then asked, and Pritchard, the footman. There was a collective pause. Nye's brow creased, Miss Vale glanced at Harbury, who merely lifted one shoulder. Lady Wrexham's voice cut in. He is, not to be found this morning. Pinkerton nodded slightly. The absence of a servant, like the absence of a portrait, demands explanation. I shall require to see his quarters, and speak to Mr. Coates again. The group broke apart soon after, Sir Barnaby excusing himself to write letters, Miss Vale to practice, the captain to walk the grounds. Nye remained behind to compliment Lady Wrexham on her taste in tapestries before taking his leave. In the corridor, Pinkerton turned to me. You noticed, of course, that Mr. Nye was the only one to echo Lady Wrexham's account of his movements, and that both placed him outside the gallery doors. That may be truth, or an agreement. And Harbury? A young man with time to idle and the habit of wandering, he said. Such men are useful, in both theft and distraction. The tour of Pritchard's quarters revealed little, a narrow bed neatly made, a pair of well-polished boots, a folded uniform. But on the small washstand, under a clean towel, Pinkerton found a scrap of heavy paper, torn, but still bearing a corner of the Greythorne crest and watermark. He held it up to the light. Not from the gallery catalogue, nor from the supper menus. I shall want to know what this belonged to. As we left, he glanced toward the servants' staircase. We will walk the route from the gallery to the orchard wall before nightfall. If the portrait left this house, it did not travel alone. Chapter 3, The Impossible Theft. By mid-afternoon, the October sky had turned the color of pewter, and a damp wind moved through the parkland. Pinkerton chose the hour deliberately. Light, he remarked, is as much an accomplice to theft as any man, or as much an alibi. We returned to the grand gallery. Its double row of portraits seemed to gaze down with equal measures of curiosity and disapproval. The empty gilt frame of Sir Richard Wrexham stared blankly from the wall, a conspicuous wound among the ranks of ancestors. Pinkerton stood in the center of the room, eyes half closed, as if listening to a music the rest of us could not hear. We will walk it, he said. Every step from the moment the guests entered to the moment the absence was discovered. Lady Wrexham had placed the evening's program on a small table near the door. First piece, Sonata in F major, Miss Ada Vale. Interlude, guests may stroll the gallery. Second piece, aria from Circe, Mrs. Lang. Supper served in the south dining room. The stroll, Pinkerton said, was between 8:15 and 8:30. The second piece began promptly after. Which means, he checked his watch, 15 minutes in which a full-length portrait in an elaborate gilt frame was removed from the wall, in a room with 2 guarded doors, without anyone seeing it leave. We began at the near door. Mr. Coates, the butler, had rejoined us, moving with that quiet dignity that made him seem to be in two places at once. He described once again the opening, the stream of guests entering, and his own position at this end of the room. At the far end, Pritchard had been stationed. And at no time, Pinkerton asked, did you or Pritchard cross to the other's position while guests were present? Not while they were within, sir, Coates confirmed. We each remained at our post. Pinkerton paced slowly toward the far door, eyes on the parquet floor. Halfway down, he stopped and knelt, running a gloved fingertip along the edge of a board. It came away faintly smeared with a dull, greasy film. Wax, he said softly. From furniture polish, but not of the kind used here. He straightened. A narrow object was slid along this section of floor, recently enough that the polish has not dried back into the wood. At the far door, Pinkerton inspected the frame and hinges. No sign of damage. Which means that if the painting passed this way, it was with the door open and permission, or under cover of something else. He turned back toward the empty frame. The carved gilt had been left immaculate, save for the faint smear we had noted on the first day. Pinkerton took out his small folding rule and measured the aperture. A standard portrait of Sir Richard's dimensions, he murmured, would require 2 men to carry at pace, unless, of course, the canvas was removed from the frame first. Lady Wrexham's brows drew together. But the frame is fixed to the wall. Precisely, madam. A thief who removes only the canvas leaves the frame behind, less conspicuous, and far lighter to escape with. Pinkerton examined the narrow strip of plaster inside the frame once more. Note here, see how the dust ends in a sharp line. The backboard has been replaced, but the cut marks along the tacking edge are fresh. Whoever did this brought tools. From his pocket he produced the small curl of thread he had found before. Canvas lint, the first sign of the portrait's departure. He laid it on his palm like a relic. We moved to the far door and stepped into the corridor leading to the servants' stair. Here, the air was cooler, and the scent of beeswax hung heavier. Pinkerton paused at the first landing, crouching to inspect a faint scuff on the skirting board. A corner turned in haste, he observed. Notice the direction, from above downward. If the canvas came this way, it was moving toward the service corridor and, perhaps, the side entrance to the east lawn. Lady Wrexham's voice sharpened. The orchard wall. Indeed, Pinkerton said. But that is the long route, and riskier than hiding it within the house. We ended our circuit in the small passage leading back to the main hall. Here Pinkerton stopped abruptly. A narrow mahogany table stood against the wall, its surface bare except for a single object, a brass button, dulled with age but showing a fresh scratch across its dome. Pinkerton lifted it gently. A button torn loose, not from livery, I think, but from an overcoat. This is heavier, plainer. He held it to the light. Possibly military. The captain's scarred face came to mind, though Pinkerton made no comment. He slipped the button into his waistcoat pocket. As we left the gallery, Pinkerton's tone was almost conversational. The puzzle, my friend, is not merely who could have taken the portrait, but why it vanished in the full knowledge of people who professed to value it. A theft in secret is one thing. A theft in plain sight, without witnesses, that is theater. I glanced back at the empty frame, its gold leaf catching what little light remained. Then you think this is a performance? Pinkerton's eyes glinted. Every performance has an audience. The question is, who was meant to see it, and what they were meant to think. Chapter 4, The Red Glove. The next morning broke bright but brittle, the autumn sunlight slanting through Greythorne Hall's tall windows as though trying to warm stone that had never quite yielded to heat. After breakfast, Lady Wrexham approached Pinkerton with a curious expression, part relief, part apprehension. "Mr. Pinkerton," she said, "one of the parlour maids has found something you may wish to see. In the music room, beneath the settee by the bay window." She handed him a small parcel wrapped in clean linen. Pinkerton unfolded it without haste. Inside lay a single red leather glove, its fingers slim, the stitching fine, and the palm faintly dusted with the powder of plaster. "Curious," Pinkerton murmured. "Not the sort of thing one drops by accident, and if dropped, not often found under furniture." We examined it in the clear light by the window. The leather was of good quality, supple but showing slight creases at the knuckles, the sort worn by someone accustomed to outdoor riding or motoring, not mere drawing-room display. Inside, the lining was faintly scented with violet. Lady Wrexham's brows lifted as she recognized it. "That is Miss Ada Vale's glove. She wore them when she arrived. I recall her removing them in the music room before she played." Pinkerton inclined his head politely. "Then we must, of course, return it to her, but not before we have considered how it came to rest beneath a settee in a room adjacent to the gallery." Miss Vale was found in the morning room, leafing through sheet music. At sight of the glove, she flushed a delicate pink. "I thought I had lost it in the carriage," she said quickly. "I must have dropped it without noticing." Pinkerton examined her face with that mild, disarming look that seemed to take in more than it gave away. "Possibly. Though one wonders how a glove dropped in the evening could gather plaster dust in the lining." Her composure wavered. "Plaster? I have no idea." As we left her, I ventured, "It seems damning. She could have slipped into the gallery during her interval, removed the canvas, and concealed it under her cloak." "Possible," Pinkerton agreed. "And yet, too possible. A bright red glove is a poor choice for a thief who wishes to remain unseen. It is, however, an excellent choice for someone who wishes a thief to be found." He held the glove up to the sunlight. "Observe, the plaster dust is old, not the fresh grit from our gallery skirting. Whoever planted this used dust from elsewhere, perhaps to echo the residue on the frame." Later, in the servants' corridor, Pinkerton asked Mrs. Brigstock whether the music room had been cleaned that morning. "No, sir," she replied. "I've kept the rooms as they were, in case you wished to see them." The glove was where the girl said, under the left settee. "Odd place for it." "Indeed," Pinkerton said. "And tell me, was anyone in the music room last night after the guests retired?" Mrs. Brigstock pursed her lips. "Mr. Harbury, sir. Said he'd left his cigarette case there." Pinkerton's brows lifted, but he only murmured, "How thoughtful of him to tidy up after himself." By afternoon, word of the glove had seeped through the household, as such things inevitably do. Miss Vale maintained her delicate indignation. Harbury offered her loud support, declaring that no one with her musical talent could possibly be guilty of common theft. Sir Barnaby muttered that gloves had nothing to do with anything, and neither dealer listened with quiet satisfaction, as though the entire affair confirmed his professional low opinion of amateurs. Only Captain Rook seemed unperturbed, choosing to walk the gardens with a measured tread, his hands clasped neatly behind him, the image of detachment. That evening, Pinkerton stood with me by the library fire. "The red glove," he said, "is the work of someone who understands the power of a single striking detail. They meant it to be found, but not too soon. It serves to occupy the mind, to draw the eye away from other, quieter movements." "You mean the real trail?" "Precisely. While we consider gloves, buttons, and missing footmen, the true business may be unfolding behind a locked door, or a panel that does not appear to be one. As he spoke, the last of the daylight died, and the house was lit from within, each tall window glowing against the dusk. Somewhere in the east wing, a door closed softly, almost stealthily. Pinkerton glanced toward the sound, then back to the fire. "Tomorrow, we will spring a small snare. If our unseen player is half as careful as I think, they will not be able to resist checking their work." Chapter 5, Whispers in the Night. That night, Greythorne Hall seemed unusually wakeful. Though the long corridors lay dim under the glow of oil lamps, the air had that particular stillness that comes when people are not sleeping, but listening. Pinkerton and I had retired early to our rooms in the west wing, though I suspected he had no more intention of sleeping than a cat watching a mouse hole. At 11:30, he appeared at my door without knocking, a finger to his lips. "Come quietly," he murmured. "We are going to the conservatory." The conservatory was a glass-walled appendage to the south side of the house, a place of orchids and delicate ferns. At night, its curved panes reflected the faintest images of the rooms beyond, while the outside lay in blackness. From the passage leading there, a thin ribbon of light spilled onto the carpet. Pinkerton held me back with a hand and inclined his head toward the source, the small anteroom just before the conservatory doors. Voices, low, urgent, were carrying across the tiled floor. "The letter's still there, I tell you," came a man's voice, tight with frustration. "Sewn into the lining. She doesn't know, but if the painting's found." A second voice, a woman's, sharper, with a trace of tremor. "Then it will be over. Don't you understand? The will is clear enough as it stands. The letter changes everything." There was a pause, a soft scrape of a chair. "If it comes to light," the man continued, "I lose Greythorne. And after everything I've put in." "You shouldn't have left it so long," the woman cut in. "Now you'll have to finish what you started." Pinkerton's eyes met mine briefly in the shadows. I recognized the man's tone, if not his exact words, Julian Harbury. The woman, though, I could not immediately place. Her voice carried the careful modulation of someone accustomed to polite society. They spoke again, but lower now, and though Pinkerton leaned slightly forward, the rest was lost to the rustle of leaves against the conservatory glass. After a moment, chairs shifted, and footsteps crossed the tiles. Pinkerton drew me into the deeper shadow of a side alcove until the sound of their retreat was swallowed by the hush of the hall. Back in our rooms, Pinkerton closed the door and set his back against it. "We now know, my friend, what Sir Richard's portrait conceals, or rather, what its canvas conceals. A letter, sewn into the lining, that alters the provisions of Lord Wrexham's will. And Harbury, I said, is in danger of losing his inheritance if it's found." "Precisely. Which means," Pinkerton said, "that he has the strongest motive for removing the portrait, though not necessarily the skill to do it unseen. That is where an accomplice comes in." The following morning, Harbury appeared at breakfast with an ease that seemed practiced. He laughed at something Miss Vale said and addressed Lady Wrexham with casual affection, as though neither late-night whispers nor missing paintings weighed upon him. If he noticed Pinkerton's gaze, he ignored it. After the meal, Pinkerton took me aside. "Our task now is twofold, to watch Harbury without letting him know he is watched, and to tempt the accomplice into making a mistake. Tonight, we set our stage." "What sort of stage?" "One where the only person who can step into the spotlight," Pinkerton replied, "is the guilty one." Later that afternoon, Pinkerton inspected the gallery once more, paying particular attention to the empty frame. He lingered at the carved acanthus leaf that had yielded that faint tremor under his touch on the first day. There, he murmured. Our panel in the wall. If the portrait is still within Greythorne, this is the likeliest hiding place. He glanced toward the far end, where sunlight pooled on the floorboards. Tonight, we will hang something there, something that appears to be Sir Richard returned, yet is not. That should bring our shadow out into the open. Chapter 6, The Trap in the Gallery. By late afternoon, the sky over Greythorne had turned to pewter again, the sun sinking in a pale wash behind the bare beeches. The hall was quieter than usual, guests and family had withdrawn to their rooms before dinner, leaving the long corridors hushed except for the occasional sigh of the wind against the leaded glass. Pinkerton had spent the early part of the day in the library, working with the butler and a discreet carpenter from the village. By 4 o'clock, the grand gallery bore the result. In the place of the empty gilt frame now hung a full-length portrait, not Sir Richard himself, but a cleverly aged reproduction on coarse canvas. Its colors were muted, the varnish dulled, and in the dim lamplight of the gallery it looked convincingly antique to a casual glance. It will serve, Pinkerton said, stepping back to inspect it. But it is the back that matters. The carpenter's work had coated the reverse of the canvas in a fine, near-invisible layer of chalk dust. Any attempt to lift or tamper with it would leave unmistakable residue on the hands and clothing of the person who touched it. Pinkerton replaced the frame's fittings and adjusted the velvet rope across the entrance. The gallery will be locked as usual after supper, he told Mr. Coates, but tonight, I will have the key. No one enters without me knowing. Coates inclined his head gravely, evidently trusting Pinkerton's judgment. At dinner, Pinkerton was in unusually light spirits. He spoke with Lady Wrexham about the orchards, with Sir Barnaby about fox hunting, and even complimented Miss Vale on her performance the night before. Harbury, seated opposite, seemed restless, glancing toward the clock more than once. The captain was silent but attentive, his gaze occasionally flicking toward the younger man. After the meal, the guests drifted toward the drawing room. Pinkerton excused himself, claiming a headache, and slipped away toward the west staircase. I followed, knowing better than to question him in earshot of others. The gallery was dark save for a single shaded lamp near the far door. The imitation portrait loomed faintly in its frame. Pinkerton extinguished the lamp, leaving the room in a shadowed half-light, then guided me to a concealed alcove behind a tall lacquered screen near the center of the chamber. Patience now, he murmured. They will not act until they believe the house asleep. The first hour passed in near silence, broken only by the ticking of the clock in the corridor beyond. Somewhere, a floorboard creaked faintly. Pinkerton's head turned, his expression sharpening in the dimness. The far door eased open without sound. A figure slipped in, cloaked, their face in shadow. They moved swiftly, as though rehearsed, straight to the portrait. A gloved hand reached up, fingers seeking the tacks along the edge. Pinkerton's hand touched my arm. Wait. The figure worked quickly, loosening one side of the canvas and peering behind it. For a heartbeat they seemed to hesitate, then began easing the false Sir Richard free of its frame. Pinkerton stepped out from the alcove, his voice quiet but unmistakable. Careful, my friend. Chalk is a devil to remove from wool. The figure froze, then spun toward the far door, but the captain was already there, emerging from the shadows with the easy precision of a man accustomed to night watches. Close the door, if you please, Pinkerton said mildly. We should like to have a little conversation. The intruder hesitated, then let the cloak fall back, revealing Miss Ada Vale, her eyes wide, her lips pressed into a thin, defiant line. Pinkerton regarded her without hostility. You have quick hands, mademoiselle, and I suspect you were chosen for that reason. But you are not the mind behind this. You came to fetch the Real Sir Richard, or rather, what is sewn into his canvas. Ada Vale's voice was steady, though low. I came because I was told the portrait would be here tonight. I thought if I had it, I could bargain my way clear. And who, Pinkerton asked softly, persuaded you that was your safest course? She said nothing. No matter, he went on. The chalk will tell us you touched this canvas, and your absence from the drawing room will tell the rest. But the one who sent you, that is the name I require. Chapter 7, The Gathering Storm. By morning, the air in Greythorne Hall felt charged, as if the wind had shifted indoors. Word of Miss Vale's nocturnal adventure had travelled with suspicious speed. Servants moved in subdued haste, guests spoke in half-sentences. Even the house itself seemed to listen. Pinkerton had not confined Miss Vale, such drama was unnecessary, but he had ensured that she took her breakfast alone in the small parlour under the polite eye of Mrs. Brigstock. The arrangement left the rest of the household to wonder what she had told him, and more importantly, whom she had named. In truth, she had named no one. But uncertainty was a lever, and Pinkerton knew how to press. At 11, Lady Wrexham gathered the household in the library at Pinkerton's request. The fire burned low, the tall windows admitted a pale wash of light. Pinkerton stood at the hearth, hands loosely clasped, his manner cordial but firm. Last night, he began, a further attempt was made upon the portrait of Sir Richard. The attempt failed. But it has provided me with evidence that the canvas was indeed removed from this house, and that it was returned, hidden, before I was summoned here. A ripple moved through the room, a shift of shoulders, a clearing of throats. I have reason to believe, Pinkerton continued, that the removal was ordered not by a stranger, but by someone within this gathering. The motive was not greed, but the suppression of a certain letter sewn into the lining of the canvas, a letter with direct bearing upon the Wrexham inheritance. Harbury shifted in his chair, though he forced a smile. This is all very dramatic, Mr. Pinkerton, but I hardly see. You see perfectly, Mr. Harbury, Pinkerton said, his voice cutting through the room without rising. You see that if the letter becomes public, your claim to Greythorne fails. You also see that you could not, yourself, remove a portrait from the grand gallery in the middle of a gathering without attracting attention. Harbury's smile thinned. And so you think I bribed Miss Vale? Absurd. Not bribed, Pinkerton said, persuaded. You used her skill with her hands, the same deftness that serves her at the keyboard, to perform the work you could not risk yourself. Captain Rook, who had been silent until now, spoke in a dry voice. If you're about to claim Harbury was behind this, why not say so outright? Because, Pinkerton replied, I am not yet finished. He let the silence hang for a moment, then turned his gaze toward the Reverend Kent. You, sir, were aware of the letter's existence long before this week. You counseled Lord Wrexham in his affairs. You knew that the letter contradicted the formal will, and you knew exactly where it was kept. The clergyman's hand tightened on his stick. If you have evidence. I have, Pinkerton said mildly, enough to know you were the one who told Harbury of the letter's location. It suited you to have him act, you believed that if he succeeded, the matter would be settled quietly, without your direct involvement. Lady Wrexham rose from her chair, her voice low but steady. Mr. Pinkerton, is it your belief that my nephew and the Reverend were in league? I believe, Pinkerton said, that their interests aligned, and that they used Miss Vale as the instrument. What I have yet to hear is which of them hid the portrait upon its return to the house, for it is here still. Every face turned toward him. I will give the one responsible until this evening to tell me where it lies. After that, I will reveal it myself, and I assure you, the moment I do, the entire arrangement will be plain to all. After the gathering broke, Harbury left the room at speed, the Reverend close behind. Pinkerton watched them go with the faintest smile. "You've driven them into each other's company," I said. "Exactly," he replied. "Two guilty men, each uncertain how much the other will admit, are far more likely to betray themselves." He glanced toward the clock. "Tonight, my friend, we will end this. And Sir Richard will return to his rightful place, complete with the letter someone has gone to such lengths to silence." Chapter 8, The Face Behind the Frame. The evening drew in cold and still, the wind having dropped so that the chimneys of Greythorne Hall sent their smoke straight into the pale sky. By Pinkerton's request, the household assembled once more in the library. Lamps had been lit, the fire burned high, and the scent of polished wood hung in the air. Lady Wrexham sat upright in the high-backed chair nearest the hearth. Beside her, Sir Barnaby looked stonier than ever. Miss Vale, pale but composed, kept her eyes on the carpet. The Reverend Kent stood by one window, his hands clasped behind his back. Harbury leaned in the shadows at the other. Captain Rook remained silent near the door, his presence solid as the oak panels. Pinkerton took his place before the mantel, one hand resting lightly on the folio of notes he had kept since his arrival. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "the matter of Sir Richard Wrexham's disappearance is, at last, concluded. The portrait never left this house. It was removed from its frame, yes, not to be sold, but to conceal, for a time, the letter sewn into its lining. The question has been not only who took it, but why." He looked at Harbury. "You, sir, had the clearest motive. The letter nullifies your claim to Greythorne in favor of another heir. You learned of it from the Reverend Kent, who, in his role as family advisor, had long known of its existence." Pinkerton shifted his gaze to the clergyman. "You, Reverend, feared the upheaval the letter would cause. You convinced yourself that keeping it hidden was in everyone's best interest, and when you realized Harbury would act regardless, you guided him." The Reverend's lips tightened, but he did not speak. "Miss Vale," Pinkerton went on, "you were drawn into this by Harbury's promise of reward, enough to settle certain debts you hoped to keep private. Your part was to free the canvas from the frame under cover of the musical interlude, pass it to Harbury in the service corridor, and return before your absence was noted." Miss Vale's cheeks colored faintly, but she met Pinkerton's eyes. "From there," he continued, "Harbury could not risk leaving the house. The captain's patrol of the grounds and the servants' awareness made that impossible. So the Reverend suggested a hiding place, the false panel in the grand gallery wall, which he had known about for years." Pinkerton paused, allowing the room's stillness to deepen. "This afternoon, while you all wondered what I knew, I opened that panel. Behind it, wrapped in a dust sheet, was the real Sir Richard, and sewn into the canvas backing, exactly as described, the letter in Lord Wrexham's hand." He turned toward Lady Wrexham and held out the folded parchment. "I have not read it, madam. That decision belongs to you and your family. But its safety is now assured." A murmur moved through the room. Harbury's eyes flicked to the Reverend with something between reproach and resignation. "Why tell us now?" Harbury demanded, his voice tight. "If you've already found it." "Because," Pinkerton said, "concealment has done its work long enough. Left hidden, the letter would breed more schemes and more deceit. Brought into the open, it can be dealt with honorably, or at least finally." Lady Wrexham rose, the letter held close in her hand. "You have my gratitude, Mr. Pinkerton. This house has been under a cloud these past days, and you have lifted it." Pinkerton bowed slightly. "It is my profession, madam, to see the picture whole, whether on canvas or in the arrangement of people's actions. When we left Greythorne Hall the next morning, the autumn sun was bright on the frost-silvered lawns. As the carriage rattled down the long drive, I asked Pinkerton if he thought the family would weather the truth in the letter. "They will," he said calmly. "Truth, like a portrait, is best seen in good light. Even if, for a time, it shows more than one wishes." He settled back, the faintest smile on his lips, and the great house receded into the trees behind us, its secrets, for now, laid bare.